Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Sharon Bown, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Captain Lisa Batchelor. We are honoured to welcome Mr. Robert Dick, Acting National President, Returned and Services League of Australia, who is joining us this evening. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Club Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors and by students on behalf of the following schools. From New South Wales, Helensburgh Public School and Kuiper Christian School, Kurrajong. From Victoria, St Columba's School, Elwood. Please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Girls and boys, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Lance Corporal Frederick Salmoni, who was killed fighting on Gallipoli during the First World War. Frederick Stanley Salmoni was born in 1893 and was one of 5 children of William and Mary Salmoni of Cardiff in Wales. After attending Stacey Road Board School, where he was an active member of the 14th Company Cardiff Boys Brigade, Salmoni worked as an apprentice fitter's helper before making the decision to immigrate to Australia. Although he had family in Childers, Queensland, his decision to start a new life in Australia may have been motivated by the birth of his illegitimate son Kenneth with Rosie Baker, who lived less than a block away in the same street. Whether or not this was the case, Salmoni joined his aunt and uncle in Childers in Queensland and took up a lease to farm 260 acres of timberland in the Goodnight Scrub near the Burnell River in 1914. Several months later, when Britain declared war with Germany, William abandoned his selection and headed to Brisbane to join the Australian Imperial Force. Salmoni enlisted in the AIF in September 1914, and after a period of training at Enoggera military camp near Brisbane, embarked as an original member of the 15th Battalion in December of 1914. According to his mother, the time Salmoni had spent in the Boys Brigade in Cardiff had prepared him well for his military service. Originally intended to fight in Europe, the Australian troop ships were diverted to Egypt to protect British interests following the Ottoman Turkey's entry into the war. Salmoni spent the following months at Mena Camp in Cairo, where the 15th Battalion trained until April of 1915, when Australian and New Zealand troops were included in an Allied effort to knock Ottoman Turkey out of the war by forcing a passage through the Dardanelles. Around this time, Salmoni's superiors noted his command and leadership qualities and promoted him to Lance Corporal. Salmoni landed on Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915, forming part of the 3rd Wave Assault that came ashore at what became known as Anzac Cove at around 9 p.m. that evening. By then, the Australian effort to secure the 3rd ridge above the beach had failed amid growing Turkish resistance. With Australian troops scattered over the area, disoriented, out of touch, and lost in the formidable terrain, confused fighting reigned on the Gallipoli Peninsula that night. After coming ashore, men of the 15th Battalion were sent to reinforce the left flank of the Australian positions and to reinforce units that had suffered heavy casualties throughout the day. As the inland advance stalled, the battalion became isolated and were threatened with annihilation unless they withdrew to a more tenable position. Salmoni's platoon was immediately sent to occupy a remote outpost in advance of the battalion's tenuous defensive positions. Turkish troops began massing against the outpost the following morning, calling on the Australians to surrender or risk being overrun. Salmoni's platoon commander refused the call to surrender and decided to retire back to the battalion under heavy fire. Salmoni, along with most of his platoon, was killed on the return journey to the 15th Battalion's defensive positions. Aged 22 at the time of his death, Salmoni's body lay in no man's land until the informal truce on the 24th of May, when it was recovered and buried in the cemetery at Shrapnel Valley. His remains were never found after the war, and as such, his name is listed on the Lone Pine Memorial among 5,000 Australian and New Zealand troops fighting on Gallipoli who have no known grave. Frederick Salmoni is listed on the Roll of Honour on your left, along with 60,000 others from the First World War. This is but one of the many stories of courage and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lance Corporal Frederick Salmoni, who gave his life for us and for our freedoms in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. Thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and good evening.